There are rooms in this world that are built for the weighing of persons, though no one who dances in them would ever agree to call it that. An assembly is one such room. It looks like pleasure. It looks like music, and candlelight, and the soft rush of good silk. And it is all of those things. And underneath them, it is a market. And the thing bought and sold across its bright floor is the answer to a single question. Who is wanted? A young woman comes into such a room and is priced in the first moment by the cut of her gown and the name at her back and the ease of the people she came in with. And the price, once set, is very hard to alter. She may not know she has been priced. She learns it soon enough, and she learns it by the hands. For an assembly is a commerce of hands before it is anything else. Hands offered and hands taken. Hands held through the long figures of the dance and let go and offered again. A hand that crosses the floor toward a young woman is worth more than any pretty thing said to her, because a word costs nothing, and a hand costs the crossing. And there is always in every such room one for whom no hand crosses, one who stands a little apart at the edge of the candlelight and watches the hands go by, and is careful, so very careful, to keep her face pleasant, so that no one in the world shall guess she has noticed that she is the one no hand will cross for. At the assembly rooms of Wexbridge, on a cold, bright evening in the back end of the year, that one was Lynette Fenn. She stood where she was meant to stand, against the wall between two tall windows, in the plain gray gown that had been turned twice, and would not bear a third turning. And she held the shawls and the fan and the little reticule of a girl who was dancing. And she watched that girl dance. The girl was Amabel Varel, 17 years of age, pink and pretty and pleased, and she was Lynette's stepsister after a fashion, though there was no blood between them at all. Amabel was wanted. You could see it in the way the hands crossed to her. Lynette held her things and smiled at her when she came near, and Amabel, who was not unkind, only young, smiled back and forgot her again at once, which is a thing the wanted do to the unwanted, without ever meaning harm by it. Lynette was 24. She had learned, in the years since her name had gone bad, a great many small arts of the wall. She had learned to stand so that she took up little room. She had learned to look at the middle distance in a way that let a person pass her by without the awkwardness of a cut, so that neither of them need feel it. She had learned that hunger, past a certain hour, grows quiet and lets a body think, if only the body keeps still. And she had learned, above all, the one art that was left to a woman who had lost every other thing, which is the art of losing it well. You kept your back straight. You did not let them see you mind. The manner of the losing was the last thing that belonged to her, and she guarded it the way another woman guards her pearls. It was her stepmother who took even that. Mrs. Verrill had come to Wexbridge that season with a single purpose, which was to see Amabel well married before the girl's bloom went off, and she pursued it as a general pursues a town. She had money now, the sound new money of her second husband, and money will buy a great deal of forgetting in a county, but it will not buy all of it, and what it would not buy was the forgetting of the name, Fenn. So Mrs. Verrill had hit upon the surest way to keep her own skirts clean of that name, which was to hang it, loudly and often, upon the girl who carried it, and to stand as far from her as the same carriage would allow. She was speaking now, a little way along the wall, to two ladies of the district, whose good opinion she wanted, and she did not trouble to lower her voice, for the lowering of a voice is itself a kind of respect, and she did not think the subject worth it. One of the ladies had asked, with the mild cruelty of the comfortable, whether the quiet young person by the window might not also be brought out this season, being of an age. That one, said Mrs. Verrill, and Linnet, 3 steps away, heard every word land. "No, indeed. That is my late husband's girl, and there is nothing to be done for her, whatever one spends. You will have heard the name. The father was Fenn." She let the name sit a moment, so that the ladies might do with it what such names are for. "I keep her from Christian duty, and because there is no one else to have her. But you may put out of your minds any thought of a match. Nobody will want her. Nobody in this county or any other. It would be a kindness to say so plainly, and I have always been one for a kindness." And she smiled, well pleased with her kindness, and turned back to the dance. It is a strange thing, to hear yourself unmade in the open air of a room full of people. Lynette did not move. She had trained herself for years not to move at such moments, and the training held, as good training does, though the floor seemed to tilt a little under her. She fixed her eyes on the middle distance. She counted the panes of the far window, which was her way, a slow and private counting that gave the mind a rail to hold. She had reached the 4th pane, and was telling herself that in an hour it would be over, and they would go home, and it would be a thing that had happened and was done, when she became aware that the room had gone quiet. Not all at once, but in a spreading hush, the way a pond goes still from the place a stone is dropped. The music thinned, the nearer talk fell away, and Linnet, lifting her eyes from the window in spite of herself, saw that people were drawing back and turning, and that a lane was opening across the bright floor, and that down that lane, unhurried, came the one man in all that county whom no crowd had ever seen cross a floor toward anyone at all. Everyone in the rooms knew the Duke of Aldermere by sight, and no one in the rooms knew him. He came to such gatherings perhaps twice in a season, and left them early, and while he was among them, he stood always at the cold edge of things, gloved to the wrist in gray, and he did not dance, and he did not take a hand, and he let no one near enough to touch the sleeve of his coat. There were as many reasons given for it as there were tongues to give them. Some said a disease of the skin that he hid beneath the gloves. Some said a madness kept quiet by his people. Some said only that he was the proudest man in England, and held himself too fine for the flesh of ordinary persons, and these were the ones who hated him. For a room will forgive a man almost anything sooner than the suspicion that he does not want it. What all of them agreed upon was the plain fact of it. The Duke of Aldermere did not cross floors. He did not offer his hand. He had not, within the memory of that county, touched another living soul where anyone could see. He was crossing the floor now. He was tall and dark, with a hard, still face that gave back nothing, and gray eyes that had in them a strange, steady attention. And he came the whole length of the room through the parting crowd and stopped in front of Linnet Fenn, the girl no hand would cross for, and he bowed to her. Then, into a silence you could have heard a pin turn in, the Duke of Aldermere drew off nothing, unbent from nothing, but simply lifted his gloved hand and held it out to her, palm up, in the old plain gesture that asks a lady to dance. To understand what that offered, hand meant, and what it cost, you must first understand the name it was offered to, and how that name had gone bad. Linnet's father had been Dr. Marlowe Fenn, a country physician of no great fortune and very great care. He had come from little and made himself by study and by the long, unglamorous labor of a man who sits up all night in cottages into the best doctor in his part of the world, though the world kept that word for men with London manners and London fees. Fenn had neither. He had a worn bag and a plain gig, and a way of listening to a sick person as though the answer were somewhere in the room if only he attended hard enough, and very often it was, and he found it. He had saved many who could pay him little, and some who could pay nothing, and he had done it for the same reason another man breathes, because it was the shape of him. Then, 7 years before that cold evening at Wexbridge, a great patient had died. Lynette had never been told the whole of it, and by the time she was old enough to ask, there was no one left to tell her. She knew only the shape it left behind. A young gentleman of a great house had fallen ill of a fever that the fashionable men first attending him had named wrong and treated wrong, and he had grown worse under their care. Near the end, when the great men had given him up, someone sent in the last hope of the desperate for the country doctor. Her father came. He saw at once, he told her once and only once, near his own death, that the fever had been named wrong from the first, and that there was still a narrow road out of it if it were taken that very hour. The great house would not let him take it. They looked at his worn bag and plain coat, heard the fine men murmur that the fellow was a nobody who would say anything to make himself important, and turned him from the sick-room door. And the young gentleman died, as her father had known he would. That would have been grief and no more, and grief is common. But a great house that has let its own be lost does not care to sit alone with the knowledge. And there were fashionable reputations in that sick room that could not afford the truth of what had named the fever wrong. So the story that went out was not that the fine men had erred and the country doctor been turned away too late. It was that a country quack had forced his way in at the end and killed the young gentleman with his meddling. It was written in no court, which was the cruelty of it, for a thing written in a court can sometimes be unwritten, and a thing only said can never be. It was simply said, by the right mouths in the right rooms, until it was everywhere, and it was believed, because the great house wished it believed, and the great house was great. Marlow Fen was ruined inside of a season. The patients who could pay fell away first, and then the patients who could not, for even the poor do not care to be tended by a man. The quality is named a killer. He kept his temper and his kindness to the end, which Lynette had thought, when she was young, was weakness, and understood now was the last and hardest form of strength. He died within 2 years of it, of nothing his old friends among the physicians could put a name to, which is to say, he died of it. He left a daughter of 17, a good plain education, a name that shut every door in the county, and a small sum of money that passed, as such sums do, into the keeping of the woman he had lately married. That woman had been, for the last unhappy stretch of the doctor's life, the second Mrs. Fen. She had married him for the comfort of a respectable profession, and got instead the worst name in 3 counties, and she never forgave him the swindle of it, nor his daughter for being the living sign of it. When a prosperous widower named Verrill offered, within a year, to make her comfortable and hush the Fen connection under his own safer name, she took him within the month, and took Lynette with her, not out of love, but because the money was Lynette's, held in trust until the girl should marry, and Mrs. Verrill had no notion of letting it out of her hands a day before she must. So Lynette had lived these years in the Verrill house as a poor relation lives, which is to say, as an unpaid servant who must also be grateful. She sewed and carried and stood against walls holding Amabel's shawls, and asked for nothing, and kept her back straight, and waited, though she could not have said for what. Nobody would want her. Her stepmother had only said aloud, in a room at Wexbridge, the thing the whole world had long since settled, and that Lynette herself had stopped arguing with in the private court of her own heart. And now a duke had crossed a floor and held out his hand to her, and the world she had made her peace with had come apart in a moment, and she did not know what to do with the pieces. She took his hand. There was nothing else a person could do. The room would not breathe until she did, and to refuse would have been a scene, and she made no scenes. She laid her fingers, in their mended glove, upon his fine gray one, and even through the 2 thicknesses of leather, She felt that his hand was rigid, held in a stillness so deliberate that she understood this touch was costing the man something she could not see the shape of. He led her out. The musicians, after a startled beat, found their tune again. And the Duke of Aldermere, who did not dance, danced one slow dance with the girl nobody would want, and said to her, in the whole length of it, only 7 words, which she would keep to the end of her life. What he said was, "Your father was a better man than they." Then the dance ended, and he bowed, and let go of her hand as though setting down something breakable, and was gone from the room before she had found her voice to answer, leaving Linnet Fenn standing in the middle of the bright floor, with every eye in the county upon her, and no idea in the world how a country doctor's disgraced daughter had come to be known, and defended and touched by the one man in England who touched no one. There is a kind of ruin that comes of being noticed, and it is worse in its way than the ruin of being forgotten, and it came for Linnet that same week. Mrs. Verrill did not speak to her on the drive home from Wexbridge. She sat rigid in the dark of the carriage with her mouth pressed to a line, and Amabel, sensing a storm she did not understand, pressed close to her mother and away from her stepsister, and Linnet sat in her corner and watched the black hedges go by, and knew that she would pay for the dance, though she had neither sought it nor been able to prevent it. She was right. The storm broke the next morning and did not blow itself out for days. That she should have drawn the eyes of the whole assembly. That she should have made herself, and the Verrill name with her, the talk of every drawing room in the district. That a girl who ought by rights to be invisible had contrived, by whatever low art, to have a duke single her out. And not any duke, but the mad one, the cold one, the one about whom no decent woman would wish her name so much as breathed in the same sentence. For that was how the county had chosen to read it. Linnet learned it slowly, from the set of a shoulder and the word left unsaid. The story going round was not that a great man had done a strange and gentle thing, but that the Fenn girl, having no name worth losing, had thrown what little she had at the feet of a man no woman of sense would court, and the 2 disgraces, the father's and the duke's, were spoken of together as though they had found their natural level in one another. It did what such stories are built to do. It made her presence in the Verrill house, which had been merely unwelcome, into a thing that threatened the one prize Mrs. Verrill guarded, which was Amabel's clean chance at a clean match. And so Mrs. Verrill reached her decision, and she announced it to Linnet on the 4th evening, in the cold parlor, with the air of a woman conferring a great and undeserved favor. She had found Linnet a situation, she said. There was a gentleman of the neighborhood, a Mr. Havelock, a widower of comfortable means and mature years, in want of a wife to keep his house and mind his affairs and comfort his age, and not, given his years and his 3 surviving children and a certain closeness with his money, in a position to be particular about a lady's connections. Mr. Havelock was willing to overlook the name of Fenn. He was willing to overlook a great deal in exchange for a young and healthy woman who would come to him grateful and cost him nothing. It was as good as arranged, and Linnet would of course see the great mercy of it, and would be married before the spring. Linnet had met Mr. Havelock. She had seen how little warmth was in the match he proposed, that he wanted a young woman chiefly to keep his house and mind his weary children, and cost him as little as could be managed, and she understood that what was offered her was not a marriage of any true kind, but an arrangement dressed in the word. She understood, too, that her stepmother's true object was the money held in trust, which would pass on Linnet's marriage into a husband's hands, and that the 2 of them had no doubt come to a comfortable understanding about where a portion of it should go. And she understood that she had no power to refuse, For a woman of 24, with no money of her own, no friend of any weight, and a name that shut every door, does not refuse the one door that opens. However it opens onto the dark, she lay awake that night and did the counting that had held her upright at the worst times, and found, for the first time, that it would not hold her, because there was nothing at the end of the counting but Mr. Havelock's house, and she could not make the count come out to anything else. It was the next afternoon that the letter came. It was brought to the Verrill house by a man in plain dark livery who would give it into no hand but Linnet's own, which caused Mrs. Verrill no small vexation, and it was a single sheet, folded once, sealed with a seal Linnet did not know, and addressed to her in a firm, upright hand. She opened it in the passage with the servant waiting, and her stepmother hovering furious at the parlor door, and she read it twice before the sense of it would come clear. It was from the Dowager Duchess of Aldermere. It was written warmly and plainly, in the manner of an old woman who has long since stopped wasting words on ceremony. Her Grace, it said, was in want of a companion and reader, being old and much alone, and out of patience with the vapid young women lately sent to her, and she had lately had cause to believe that a certain Miss Fenn, of the neighborhood of Wexbridge, might suit her uncommonly well. The wages named were more than Linnet had seen in a year. A room would be kept for her at Larkfield, the dowager's house. A carriage would come for her on the Thursday, if she would consent to come, and there was no need to send an answer before it, for the carriage would serve as answer either way. And at the foot of it, after the old lady's own name, was a single line added in a different hand, harder and more spare. The same hand, Linnet saw with a small turn of the heart, that she had felt rigid inside a gray glove. The line said only, "You need not marry anyone. Come and be safe." Linnet stood in the cold passage with the letter shaking very slightly in her fingers, and she did not know whether what she felt was hope or a new and finer kind of fear, for she had learned in 7 hard years that nothing in this world is given without a price, and that the gifts which seem kindest are most often the ones whose price falls due the latest and the heaviest. She thought of the Duke of Aldermere, the man they called mad and cold, the man whose very notice had ruined what little was left of her, and she asked herself why such a man should trouble himself over a country doctor's daughter he had met for the length of one dance. She could find no answer that did not frighten her, and she thought of the joyless house that waited for her otherwise, and of the counting that would no longer come out, and she understood that she was being offered, by a hand she had every reason to distrust, the one thing her own world would never offer her again, which was a choice. On the Thursday, the carriage came. It was warm inside, and there was a rug folded on the seat, and Linnet wrapped herself in it, and hated a little how good it was, and let herself be carried out of the only county she had ever known, toward a house she had never seen, and an old woman she did not know, and a silent man who touched no one and had touched her, for a reason she could not begin to guess, and could not, for the life of her, stop trying to. Larkfield, when the carriage came to it at the close of the second day, was not the house Linnet had built in her mind along the road. She had built a grim one. It stood to reason, she had thought, that a man the world called mad and cold, a man who would not so much as touch his fellow creatures, would keep a house to match himself, shut and dark and hung with dust sheets, all long unlit halls and covered chairs. She had made herself ready for that, because a thing made ready for cannot wound you fresh, and readiness was another of the small arts she had learned against the wall. Larkfield undid the readiness at a stroke. It was an old house, low and long and easy, of a pale warm stone the color of good bread, set among bare winter orchards, with the downs rising soft behind it. It did not hold itself apart from its land, the way a great cold seat holds itself, but seemed to have settled down into the earth over long years, the way an old dog settles by a hearth. Lamps were lit in the low windows, though the dark was not yet full down. Smoke stood up straight and gentle from a row of chimneys. There was ivy on the stone, and a smell on the cold air of wood smoke and wet earth, and under those, faint and impossible in the dead heart of the year, the green smell of something growing. The whole of it said, as plainly as a house may say a thing, that here was a place lived in and tended, and though she could not think why the word should rise in her, loved. It was the last thing she had looked for. It unsettled her more than any grimness could have done. For grimness, she had an answer ready to. This she had none. She was met at the door by the housekeeper, a round, low-voiced woman named Mrs. Tolly, and here too her readiness failed her, for Mrs. Tolly did not look at her in the way the years had taught her to expect. There was no quick tightening of the face, no drawing back from the name, none of the small cruelties that had met her at every threshold for 7 years. Mrs. Tolly only took Linnet's cold hands in her 2 warm ones and clucked at the state of them, and lifted the light little box herself before a footman could, as though it held something of worth, and drew the stranger in out of the dusk, as though she had been long looked for and was late. Linnet was given a room, and it was warm, the fire in it lately tended, and there was hot water, and a supper laid by, and the whole of it done before she had asked for any part of it, so that she stood in the middle of the good plain room and did not know what to do with herself. In 7 years, no one had warmed a room for her before she asked. She had half forgotten there were houses where such a thing was simply done, and the forgetting, once found, made an ache in her she had no name for. But that was not the thing that undid her. The thing that undid her was in the library. Mrs. Tolly had told her, in the bustle of settling, that her Grace kept a great room of books along the south front, and that Miss Fenn was to use it as she pleased, for those had been the orders given. And Linnet, who had loved books as her father loved them, and had not had the free run of any for 7 years, went down to it that first evening, as a thirsty creature goes to water. It was a long, low room, lined to the ceiling, smelling of leather and cold paper. She went along the shelves in the candlelight with her heart easing in her chest, and then she stopped, and the ease went out of her all at once, for she had come to a low case near the window, set apart from the rest, and she knew the books in it. She knew them. She knew the fat brown herbal with the cracked spine her father had mended with thread. She knew the tall, thin book of anatomy, with his initials inked small inside the cover. She knew the worn case of his lecture notes in his own close hand, and the ranked spines of his physic and his old dispensatory, every one of them a book she had watched carried out of her father's house on a barrow 7 years before, and sold at the door to pay men he had never owed, while she stood at an upper window and was not let to cry. They were here, everyone, gathered again from wherever 7 years had scattered them, bought back one by one out of the shops and the sales they had been flung into, and set here in a case by the window as though they had never been parted, and set here before she came, before she had spoken a word of them to a living soul, before the man who had done it could have known whether she would ever come at all. She stood before the little case with her candle shaking, and Linnet Fenn, who had trained herself out of weeping in 7 hard years because weeping cost too much, laid her hand flat on the cracked spine of her father's herbal and wept, and could not for her life have said whether it was grief or some warmer and far more frightening thing that had at last undone her. She met the mistress of the house that same evening, when she had washed the weeping from her face and could trust herself again. The Dowager Duchess of Aldermere was a small, straight woman of near 80, with a face like a folded map and quick, dark eyes that took a person in at one glance and told nothing of what they made of it. She talked from the moment Lynette was brought in, easily and without pause, of the road and the cold and the uselessness of the 3 girls last sent to read to her. And it was a while before Lynette understood that the talk was itself a kindness, that the old woman had seen her reddened eyes and her fright, and was covering them, asking nothing of her but that she sit by the fire and let the words go by until she had stopped trembling. Only once did the flow of it check. Lynette, when she could trust her voice, asked the one thing she had come down meaning to ask, which was who had gathered her father's books. The old woman looked at her a moment with the quick, dark eyes. "That," she said, "you must ask my grandson, though I will save you the hoping and tell you now that he will not answer, for there is a great deal he does not answer, and that is chief among it." And she turned the talk to other things, and Lynette understood that she had come up against the edge of what she would be told, and that the rest of it lay somewhere in the silence of a man she had not yet properly seen. She saw him the next morning. She could not sleep in so strange a bed, and rose while the house was still dark, and dressed, and went down, drawn by the thing she had noticed on the road and could not account for, which was that green smell of growing in the dead of the year. She followed it out through a garden door into the cold, along a wall, to a place she had not looked for. Behind the house, walled in old brick, lay a garden laid out in the old physic fashion, in squared beds and narrow paths, brown and sleeping under the frost. Along its south wall ran a long glass house, lit gray with the coming dawn and warm, and it was full from end to end of green. She stood in the doorway. It was a physician's garden kept under glass, a working one, held alive through the winter by some patient art of heat and tending. She had been raised among such plants. Her father had kept just such a garden, smaller and poorer, and taught her the use of every bit of it before she could well read. And here they all were, the healing herbs, thriving in the cold heart of the year as though someone could not bear to let them die. And at the far end, among them, stood the Duke of Aldermere. He had not heard her, or had, and given no sign. He stood with his back half to her, gloved, still, looking down at some low green thing with the whole of that strange attention she had felt across the assembly floor. She must have made a sound, for he turned. And Lynette, who had braced herself the whole long road for what such a man might want of a penniless girl. He had bought out of her stepmother's house, looked into the gray eyes across the length of the warm green room, and saw at once that she had braced for the wrong thing. There was no want in them of the kind she had feared. There was something else, something that looked, impossibly, like a man regarding a debt he did not know how to pay. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied, and did not know what else to do. He did not come toward her. She would learn that he never came toward anyone, that the distance between himself and every living creature was a thing he kept without effort and without exception. He inclined his head, and when she took a single step in out of the draught, she saw him, without seeming to move, keep the width of the room between them, as a man steps back from an edge. He spoke. His voice was low and even, spare of anything warm, and it carried the length of the green room without his lifting it. "You are up early." I could not sleep. I followed the smell of the garden. I did not think to find one living in the winter. And then, because she was her father's daughter, and could not help it, she named what stood nearest her hand. "That is Feverfew, and the tall one there is Angelica, though it is early for it to stand so green." Something moved in the still face, not a smile, the faint beginning of one, quickly gone. "You know them?" "My father kept a garden. He taught me before I could read." She stopped, for the mention of her father in this house, before this man, was a thing whose weight she did not yet know. The Duke was quiet a moment. Then he said, in the same even voice, "You have the run of it. Come when you like." And then, more quietly, the first thing he had said that seemed to cost him anything. "Your father grew these too. Angelica against a south wall, and feverfew by the door, the same as here." She went very still. "How do you know what my father grew?" But he had already inclined his head and gone out by the far door, keeping his distance to the last, and he did not answer her, and left her among her father's healing plants in the gray light, with a heart she could not govern and a question she could not put down. She had come to Larkfield braced for a price, and she spent her first days there waiting for it to be named. Everything in 7 years had taught her that nothing is given for nothing, that the kindnesses which seem freest are only the ones whose reckoning falls due the latest and comes dearest when it comes. So she watched. She watched the Duke for the moment his strange courtesy would turn and show its underside. She watched for the demand behind the warm room, the restored books, the garden given her at first light. She waited for the catch in it, because a catch she understood and could have borne, having borne so many. The catch did not come. That was the thing she could fit into no shape she knew. The days went by, gray and quiet and warm, and the Duke asked her for nothing at all. He did not seek her out. He kept to his hours and his distances. He left her the garden and the books and her own long silences, and required of her only that she read of an afternoon to his grandmother, which was no hardship, for the old woman was sharp and dry and good company once you had the measure of her. No hand closed. No price was named. Once, in the second week, she put it to the test without meaning to. A jug of cream was upset in the still room by her own hand, a good deal of it, over a paper of dried leaves she had been sorting, and the old dread came up in her whole and cold before she could stop it. The dread of 7 years, of the raised voice, and the docked wage, and the long, punishing silence to follow. And she stood over the ruin of it, with her heart going, and waited to be made to pay. Mrs. Tolly only laughed, and fetched a cloth, and said there was cream enough in the dairy and no harm done, and that was the whole of it. No one told the Duke, or someone did, for little at Larkfield escaped him, and if it reached him, he said nothing, and nothing followed, and the not following was its own small torment, for she did not know what to do with a house in which a spilled thing was only a spilled thing. And Linnet found, to her own confusion, that the not knowing frightened her more than a price would have. For a price she could have paid, and been done, and this she could not pay, because it was not asked, and a debt that is never named can never be discharged, and so can never be escaped. She lay awake, turning it over. A man did not gather a ruined stranger's books out of 7 years of shops and sales for nothing. A man did not keep a whole garden of healing alive through a winter for nothing. A man did not cross a public floor before all the county to a girl no one would touch, and touch her for nothing. There was a reason under all of it, deep and old and hidden, and the not seeing of it lay on her like a hand. She had come to Larkfield braced against cruelty. She had not thought that she would need bracing against its opposite, and had brought no armor for it at all. We will pause here a moment, for the story now begins to turn, and it does not turn the way she feared, nor the way you would guess. If you would not miss the turning, take a moment now to subscribe, and we will go on into the heart of it. She found out the true shape of him slowly, in the way one finds out the shape of a thing in the dark, by the parts of it the hand meets. The garden was the first part. She had taken it, that first morning, for a rich man's whim, a costly toy, a house of pretty green kept for the pleasure of a man, with money to burn on pleasures. It was nothing of the kind, and she knew it within the week, for a person who works among plants soon learns what a garden is for, and this one was for use. The beds under glass were not laid out for show, but in the old, sober order her father had used, the herbs for fever set together, the herbs for the chest, the herbs to staunch, and the herbs to ease, each in its measured plot, cropped and come again and cropped again, the way a bed is only worked when its yield is wanted hard and often. Someone was taking a great deal of medicine out of this garden, not for one house, for a countryside. She began to see where it went. She rose early, as was her way, and more than once in the gray she saw a manservant go out at the garden gate with a covered basket, and come back an hour later, empty, and say nothing. And she learned from Mrs. Tolly, who could not keep a kind thing secret however she tried, that the baskets went to the cottages, to the sick poor of 3 parishes, the very ones the fee-taking doctors would not cross a lane to see, and that they had gone out so quietly before light, for as long as Mrs. Tolly had been at Larkfield, which was years. She came upon the truth of it, whole one raw afternoon, on an errand of the old lady's to a cottage past the village. A child had been ill there, very ill, a boy of 6, and Linnet found the mother, a thin, worn woman named Sefton, with the child mending on her knee and a light in her face that had no business in so poor a room. Mrs. Sefton spoke of it the way country people speak of a wonder, not knowing who Linnet was or where she lodged. The boy had been burning up a week since, she said, past what she knew to do, and no doctor would come to the like of them without money laid down first, and she had none. And then before light one morning, there had been a parcel at the door, physic in it, and a paper of plain instructions writ out clear, how much, and how often, and what to watch for, and a second parcel 2 days after, and a third, until the fever broke. No name to any of it, no knock even, just there in the cold, before the birds. Some good soul, said Mrs. Sefton, and shook her head over the child's hair. The parson says it is Providence, and I let him say it. But Providence does not write out a dose in a fair round hand, nor come again on the 3rd day to be sure. I put my good soul in my prayers of a night. I have no name to give him. I reckon the one I pray to knows the one I mean. Linnet walked home with that in her, and it did not leave her. She knew the physic. She had made up some of it herself that very week in the still room, from the beds under glass. She knew the fair round hand, or knew whose direction stood behind it, and she understood, walking the cold lane, a thing that turned her whole picture of that winter over. She had believed herself the one soul in the county who owed the Duke of Aldermere a debt she could not name. She saw now that she was one of a great company. They were scattered through the cottages and the lanes and the poor back rooms of 3 parishes, a whole quiet multitude of people kept from dying by a hand not one of them could thank, who put a nameless man in their prayers and did not know that he had a name at all, and a house, and a title, and a wall around him that no living soul could cross. She asked the dowager about it that evening, plainly, for she had to know. The old woman was quiet a while over her work. He does not like to be thanked, she said at last. I would have you understand that it is not modesty, for you will be tempted to name it modesty, and it is a harder thing than that. He does not believe that anything of his that is only said, or only given from his own hand into another, is worth the having. He has come to trust only the things that are real and can be done at a distance and never traced. A dose of physic is real, a broken fever is real, a garden kept alive is real. These he can do without ever standing close enough to be thanked, and so these are the only things he will let himself do. She set down her needle and looked at Linnet with her quick old eyes. He was not always so. That is the part you do not know, and I will not tell you, for it is his and not mine. But I will tell you this much. He was the warmest boy God ever made. Something taught him that his warmth did harm. I was there when it taught him. I have watched him pay the lesson every day for 7 years, and I would give what is left of my life to unteach it, and I cannot, because the only hand that can is his, and he will not lift it. Linnet carried that up to her cold room, and lay a long time awake with it. She had come to Larkfield watching a strange man for the price of his kindness. She began, after that night, to watch him for something else entirely, not for the price, for the wound. So the winter settled into a shape, and the shape had the 2 of them in it, though not one word of the shape was spoken by him, and neither of them would have called it what it was. It was built in the glass house, at first light, which was his hour, and became, by a thing neither of them arranged, theirs. She would be there before him, most mornings, among the beds in the gray warmth, and he would come in at the far door and take up his work at the far end, and they would labor apart, the whole width of the green between them, and out of that width they began to talk. It should have been awkward, a conversation held at the length of a room by 2 people who never came nearer. It was not. She had never in her life been so easy with anyone. She talked, mostly, for she was the one who could reach the plants. That was the thing she came to understand about the shape of it. He knew the physic, knew it deeply, better than any man she had met but her father. But he did the knowing, at a remove, by the book and by the eye, and never by the hand. For his hands would not go where a hand must go, close, into the work of another life. So she became his hands. She learned to read the small motions of his stillness, the tilt of his head at a leaf gone wrong, the pause that meant a bed wanted cutting. And she did the reaching and the cutting and the making up. And he stood off and named the doses and the cautions. And between the 2 of them, the baskets went out fuller than they had gone in years. She was the touch the garden had lacked. She had not known there was a use in the world for a ruined doctor's daughter, and she had found one, and it was this, to be the near hand of a man who had no near hand of his own. They talked of more than plants. She would say a thing about a book she had found in the long room, some argument she did not hold with, and he would answer it dry and exact from the far end, and often unexpectedly funny, so that she laughed aloud in the green, which she hadn't done in a house for 7 years. She learned that he read everything, that behind the cold wall was a mind starved for use and glad, painfully glad, of a voice to answer it. She learned that he was not proud, whatever the county said, that the pride they hated in him was only the wall they could not see the reason of. She came to look forward to the first light hour, as she had not let herself look forward to anything in a long time, and the looking forward frightened her, for she knew where it tended. There came a caller to Larkfield that season who showed her how far it had already tended. A county lady, a Mrs. Ockford, who paid the dowager a duty visit twice a year and stayed too long, sat at the tea and worked her way, in the manner of such women, to the subject she had come for. It was said, she observed comfortably, that the Duke was not quite right, that the silence and the strangeness of him, the way he would touch no Christian soul, was not natural in a man, and that, where a thing was not natural, one did well to wonder what lay under it. Her own husband held that a man who kept the whole world at arm's length had something at the end of that arm he did not care to have seen. Linnet set down her cup. She had not meant to speak. She heard herself speak. "Your husband is mistaken," she said. "I have lived under this roof the winter through, I have seen the sick of 3 parishes kept from the grave by that man's hand, and every stroke of it done, so that no one should ever see it or thank him for it. That is not a man hiding a wicked thing at the end of his arm. That is a man who has decided that a kindness seen is worth less than a kindness done, and has chosen to do a great many and be seen at none. I would there were more men so unnatural, and fewer who are natural over the tea. There was a silence. Mrs. Ockford's smile set hard. Across the room, the dowager made a small sound into her needlework that was not a cough, and Linnet, her heart going, understood 2 things at once: that she had been unpardonably rude to a guest, and that she had meant every word and would say it again. She had spoken for the man who touched no one exactly as, one cold night at Wexbridge, the man who touched no one had crossed a floor and spoken for her. She did not know then that he heard of it. Little passed at Larkfield that did not reach him. That evening there lay on the case of her father's books a single folded paper in his firm, narrow hand, and it said only that Mrs. Ockford's opinion had never weighed a feather with him, but that he stood in Linnet's debt for the answer she had given it, and she kept the paper, and did not ask herself too closely why. He watched her more than she knew that winter, and wanted more than he wrote. There were mornings in the glass house when she would reach past him for a knife or a bundle of cut stems, and her hand would come near his, a hand's breadth off and no more, and she would feel him go rigid in the old way, the way he had gone rigid on the assembly floor, and she learned not to close the breadth, because closing it hurt him, though she could not have said how she knew. But she saw once, when she had passed him, a cut length of Angelica, and their gloved fingers had all but grazed, that he stood a long moment after, with his eyes shut, like a man holding a door against a great weight on the other side of it. And she understood, with a turn of the heart, that the weight on the other side of that door was the wish to let it open, and that it was for her, and that he did not trust it, and would not, for reasons she did not yet know. It was the dowager who told her, in the end, and she told her because she was old and afraid of what a girl might do out of not knowing. It was a hard, bright morning in the deep of February, and the old woman was in a fierce mood, and she looked at Linnet across her work and said without leading up to it, "You do not yet know why he brought you here. It is eating you, and I have watched it eat you, and I am going to break my word to my grandson and tell you, for I am too old to sit by and let a good thing spoil for want of a truth. I would rather you did a foolish thing knowing than a wise one blind. Sit down." Linnet sat. "Do you know how your father was ruined? The whole of it, or only the part the county chews on?" "I know he did not do it," said Linnet. "He told me so himself near the end, and I believed him. Yes, he did not." The old woman's mouth was grim. "I will tell you who did. It was no one. That is the cruelty at the root of it. No one killed that young man, but a fever wrongly named by 3 fashionable fools who would not be told they were wrong, and your father was the one honest man in the business, and for his honesty, they broke him." She was quiet a moment. "The young man who died was my grandson's brother. His name was Rowan. He was 19 years old, and there was never a sweeter creature born, and he was Gideon's whole heart." The room had gone very still. They were close as boys can be, those 2, and when Rowan took the fever, it was Gideon who sat with him day and night. The knighted physicians came with their long words, and named it one thing, and dosed him for that thing, and he sank, and at the last, when the fine men had given him over, it was Gideon, 22, and frantic, who sent in secret for a country doctor he had heard, could work wonders where the great men failed. Your father came. He saw in a moment that the fever had been named wrong from the first, and said there was yet a road out of it if it were taken that hour. And Gideon's father, the old duke, would not hear it. His knighted men were about him, and their pride was up, and they told him the fellow was a jumped-up nobody who would say anything, and my son believed the men of his own rank over the man of none, and had your father put out of the house." Linnet could not speak. Gideon went down on his knees to his father in the passage. I saw it. He begged him to call the country doctor back, to try the road he had named, for what was there to lose? His father would not. And so the great men kept their pride and went on with their wrong dosing, and Rowan died 3 days after, holding his brother's hand, and the road your father had seen was never taken. The old woman's voice did not break, but it had gone terrible and level. And then, when the boy was dead, there was a thing that could not be borne, which was that the truth of it might be known, that the old duke had turned away the one man who could have saved his son. So the fashionable men, to bury their error, and my son, to bury his, put out the story you have lived under these 7 years, that a country quack had forced his way in and meddled and killed the heir's brother. They made the man who tried to save Rowan into the man who killed him. They ruined your father to keep from facing what they had done, and my son let it be done, and I let it be done, for I was a coward too, and old, and it is the shame of my life." She looked at Linnet with her wet, fierce eyes. "Now you know why he will not touch a living soul. The last hand he ever held freely was his brother's, going cold in his, on a bed he could not save him from, because the grown men who should have known better would not listen to the one who did. He came out of that room believing that his own hands were good for nothing but to hold the dying, and he has not, from that day, let them take another living hand, for fear, I think, of what he believes he brings. And he came out of it, owing your father a debt that could never be paid, for your father died before it could be, and my son died still lying, and there was no one left in the world to pay it to but you." She folded her hands. "There it is. He found where you were, refused at every door, near given away to a loveless match, and he did the only thing a man can do who trusts nothing he says and no touch of his own. He opened his house to you, gathered your father's books, gave you back your father's garden, and never once let himself believe it was for anything but the debt. He does not know he loves you, child. I am old enough to see it when he cannot, but he will call it a debt to the last, for a debt is a thing he can pay in silence, and love would require him to lift the hand he swore never to lift again." Linnet sat a long time in the bright, cold room. She understood now the whole terrible shape of it. The 7 words on the assembly floor, the debt in the gray eyes that first morning, the garden of her father's plants kept green through 7 winters. Everything he had done that strange season had been done, she saw, not for her at all, but in penance to a dead man his own family had destroyed, and he had never once let himself imagine that she might come to matter to him for her own sake. And she understood, sitting there with a pang that took her breath, that she had come to want him to, that she had fallen, somewhere in that winter of green hours and folded papers, wholly in love with the Duke of Oldermere, and that he did not know it, and would never guess it, and believed himself only to be paying an old account to a name. It was a bitter thing to a proud woman, and pride was near all she had left. She thought for a day that the one bearable course was to go, to stop taking a kindness that was in truth an apology to her dead father, and keep the last of her pride. But she did not go, and the reason changed everything. She had come to Larkfield to be saved, and had begun in the glass house at first light to see that she might be the one who saved. Here was a man walled alive in himself for 7 years, by a wound no one had tried to heal. And she was, perhaps, the one soul living who could, being the very thing his guilt was made of, the doctor's daughter, come not to accuse him but to forgive. To have that to give, when she had thought she had nothing left to give, was worth more than any wage or warm room, and so she stayed. The trouble came, as trouble does, from the one who had most to lose, if the truth of an old thing were ever let up into the light. The fashionable physicians who had named Rowan's fever wrong were 3, and 2 of them were dead. The third was very much alive. He was Sir Julius Crane, and in the years since he had done what small men do, who have made a great error and buried it, which is to climb, so that the height might make the buried things safe. He was the first physician of the county now, knighted, courted, a fixture at every good table for 30 miles, a smooth, full-fed man with a warm bedside voice and cold eyes that never quite settled. It was Sir Julius who, 7 years before, had led the making of the lie that a country quack had killed the heir's brother, for the lie that damned Marlowe Fenn was the same lie that hid Sir Julius Crane's own wrong dosing, and the two could not be parted. So long as Fenn stood a murderer, Crane stood a great man. Let Fenn once be shown an honest one, and the whole county would turn and ask, in a single breath, then who was it that named the fever wrong? Sir Julius had slept easy on it for 7 years, for the doctor was dead, and the daughter was nothing, and no one of weight had ever spoken the name Fenn, but a mute mad duke who spoke to no one. And then he heard, as the county heard, that the mad duke had crossed a floor at Wexbridge to the Fenn girl, and had taken her into his own house, and kept her there. And Sir Julius Crane, who had a nose for the buried thing, the way another man has a nose for smoke, understood at once that the one danger left in the world to him had just gathered itself under the one roof in England that could give it weight. He moved as such men move, pleasantly, without a mark left, in a way that could never be traced to him. He did not need to invent anything. He had only to help the county say the thing it was already half saying, and to say it in the right voice, at the right tables, with the right sorrowing shake of the head. Such a pity, he let it be understood, that a young woman of that name, of all names, should have thrown away her last rag of character to go and live so very irregularly with a man like Aldermere, of whom one heard such things, and Mrs. Verrill, robbed of the girl and of the comfortable sum that was to have come to her through the Havelock match, and stung to fury that the drudge she had cast off had landed soft, took up the same tune with a will, and between the smooth physician and the spiteful stepmother, the story went through the county like a fire through gorse. It did what such stories are built to do. It was the one weapon there is no shield for, because it is made of nothing, and you cannot strike nothing. Linnet felt it close around her by degrees, the way she had felt the first ruin close, a coldness where there had been civility, a call not returned, an averted eye in the village she had thought her friend. And then it reached the one person she could not bear to see it reach, the Dowager Duchess of Aldermere, near 80, who had not been refused a door in 60 years, went to pay a call at a house where she had been received since she was a bride, and the daughter of the house came out to the carriage herself, pink and wretched, to say that her mother was not at home. The old woman sat very straight all the way back and said nothing until the gates of Larkfield, and then she said, in a voice that shook with a rage Linnet had never heard in it, "So, they will shut their doors on me at my age, over a lie, sooner than shut them on Julius Crane. We shall not let it rest there." But under the rage, Linnet heard the hurt, and knew herself the cause of it. She lay awake that night, and did the counting that had held her upright at the worst times, and it would not hold her, for at the end of every count stood the same sum. Her presence was ruining the two people who had been, in all the world, the only ones to take her in unpriced. The old woman's doors, the Duke's peace, the quiet good work of the garden, which could not go on if the county turned wholly against the house that did it. She was the poison in all of it, and she loved them. And the one clean thing she could still do for people she loved was the thing she had refused to do a month before, which was to take herself and the lie away, and let the doors swing open again behind her. She went to him that evening. She had never once in the whole winter gone to him to speak of a thing that mattered. She went now. He was in the long library when she found him, at the case of her father's books, as though he had known she would come there and had chosen the ground. She stood in the doorway and made herself say all of it plainly, because he was a man who trusted only the real, and a plain truth, plainly said, was the realest thing she had to give him. "You must let me go," she said. "You know what is being said. You know who is saying it. Your grandmother was turned from a door today at her age, after 60 years, because of me. That woman and Sir Julius Crane between them mean to ruin this house, and they will, because a lie in the right mouth cannot be answered. I will not stay and be the thing that ruins the two people who took me in." Her voice caught, and she steadied it. "And I know why you brought me here. Your grandmother told me. I know about my father, and about your brother, and what your family did, and what it cost you. I know this was never a place. It was a debt, and you have paid it, your grace, 10 times over. I release you from the rest. You owe my father nothing further, and you owe me nothing at all. Let me go, and let the lie go with me, and keep your grandmother her doors, and yourself your peace. It is the last thing I have that I can do for anyone, and I am asking you to let me do it." There was a long silence, and it was not like the other silences. She watched him stand there among her father's books, and she watched the wall she knew so well fight to hold. He was a man who had answered the world for 7 years by staying behind it, and never once reaching through. And now, faced with a thing that staying behind it would not answer, she saw him make a choice she would carry to the end of her life. He crossed the room to her. He came the whole width of it, the distance he had kept from every living creature for 7 years, and he did not stop at arm's length as he stopped at every arm's length in the world. He drew off his glove, and the Duke of Aldermere, who had not touched a living soul since a boy died holding his hand, lifted his bare hand and laid it against the side of Linnet's face, and it was not steady, and she felt how it was not steady, and she stood and let him and didn't breathe. "No," he said. His voice was rough and low, as costly as the hand. "You will not go. I let you believe it was a debt, because a debt was a thing I knew how to carry. It was a debt once. It has not been one for a long while. It stopped the morning you stood in my glass house and named the plants my hands have not deserved to tend, and I did not tell you, because I have not, in 7 years, trusted anything I might say or reach for to be anything but harm. I called that wisdom. My grandmother is right. It was never wisdom. It was fear wearing a wound for a mask, and you have taken the mask off, and I am done with it." His thumb moved once against her cheek, unpracticed, wondering, a man learning again the use of a hand he had condemned. "You are not the poison in this house. You are the only thing that has been alive in it since Rowan died. And I will not let Julius Crane, who killed my brother with his pride and your father with his lie, take you from it. I have been afraid of my own voice and my own hands for 7 years. I am going to spend both, now, all at once, and I am going to spend them where the harm was done. The great winter assembly of the county was held, as it was held every year, in the long rooms at Wexbridge, and everyone came to it who was anyone for 30 miles, and that year they came burning with the story of the Fen girl and the mad Duke. Sir Julius Crane came in his finest, sure at the very height of his power that he had won, and Mrs. Verrill came on his coattails, and the two of them let fall their small, sighing mentions of the poor lost girl, and were content to watch them do their work. Linnet had not wished to come. The Duke had asked her, in his rough, relearned voice, and she found she could refuse him nothing when the asking cost him so much, and so she came, on the dowager's arm, into the bright rooms full of the people who had refused her every door, and she held her back straight, and was cut, thoroughly, by 100 people at once, the space opening around her as around a thing diseased. She bore it. She had borne it before. And then the Duke of Aldermere crossed the room. They did not, at first, understand what they were seeing. They saw the mad Duke, whom they had half forgotten, was even present, for he had been standing at the cold edge as he always stood, come off the wall and walk the length of the floor. They made way, as they always made way, and he came to where Linnet stood alone in the cleared ring of turned backs, and he stopped before her, and he drew off his glove in front of all of them, and he took her bare hand in his bare hand, and held it, the man who touched no one, so that every soul in the room saw the wall come down. Then he turned to face them, and he did the other thing he had not done in 7 years, which was to spend his voice on a room. "You have made a long entertainment of my silence," he said, and the rooms went still as held breath, and called it madness and pride, and I let you, for I had nothing I judged worth the breaking of it. I have something now. 7 years ago my brother died of a fever, 3 fashionable men named wrong, and would not be told they had. Before he died, one honest physician came and saw the error, and said there was a road out of it, and my father was persuaded by these fine men to turn that honest physician from the door. His name was Dr. Marlowe Fenn. He was no quack and no killer. He was the only man in that house who was right. A stir went through the room. He let it pass, and his voice hardened. When my brother was dead, the men who had named the fever wrong could not bear that it should be known, and so they made the man who had tried to save him into the man who had killed him. They ruined an innocent healer to hide their own error, and the hand that led the making of that lie, then and ever since, was Sir Julius Crane. He drew from his coat a folded packet and held it up. I have here the written opinions of the physicians from that time, kept among my father's papers, in Sir Julius Crane's own hand, naming the fever what it was not. And I have here Dr. Fenn's notes of the same days, in his hand, naming it what it was, which is to say, naming it right. Read together. By any man of sense, they say the whole of it. Fenn was right. Crane was wrong. And Crane spent 7 years and an innocent man's name to keep you from knowing which was which. His gray eyes went once round the silent room. Marlowe Fenn was innocent. His daughter is innocent. And the next person under this roof who offers her an unkindness will answer for it to me. I have held a great deal back for 7 years, and I find tonight that I am done holding it. In the middle of the stillness, alone, Sir Julius Crane stood with his warm bedside smile gone at last from his face, and one by one, the whole bright room turned slowly to look at him. The doors of that county closed on Sir Julius Crane in the weeks that followed, one after another, exactly as they had once closed on a country doctor and his girl. and there was no triumph in it that Linnet could find, only the old sad justice of a buried thing come up at last into the light. The two written opinions did their quiet work where no shouting could have. A board of physicians in London that had once struck Marlowe Fenn's name from its rolls put it back, with a correction entered in the dry language such places use, that the said Fenn had been wrongly held to blame and stood acquitted, and his good name restored to him and to his heirs. Mrs. Verrill's little fire of scandal, cut off at its root, went out for want of feeding. The doors that had shut on Linnet opened again, all of them, eager now, ashamed now, and she found she did not much care for them, having learned exactly what they were worth. It was in the glass house, at the first light hour that was theirs, that she learned the last of it, the part even the dowager had not known to tell. She had asked him, holding the London paper that gave her father back his name, the thing that had sat on her heart since the assembly. "You gave him back his name," she said, "and he is not here to have it. He died believing he had failed. He never knew that anyone of weight believed him but me, and I did not count." "He knew," said the Duke. It was the first she had heard of it. "I went to him, after Rowan died, after my father had let the lie go out, before your father was quite gone. I was 22, and I had no proof and no power and nothing in the world to give him but words, which I had already learned were worth little. I gave them to him anyway. I told him I knew he had been right. I told him I knew what my family had done, and that I was ashamed to my bones, and that I would not rest while I lived until it was set right, however long it took." He was quiet a moment. He was a better man than I will ever be. He did not curse me, which I had come prepared for. He took me out to his garden instead, the one your stepmother's men were already itemizing for the sale, and he taught me his beds, everyone, the whole cold afternoon, and at the end of it he gave me cuttings and told me to keep them alive and put them to use. For a garden, he said, does not know whose name is disgraced, and goes on healing whoever is set before it. He looked at the green all around them. "These are his plants, Linnet. Every bed in this house is grown from the cuttings your father gave a grieving boy the week before he died. I have kept them alive 7 years. It was the first thing I did in my silence, and clearing his name was the last, and everything between was only the waiting." She wept then, and he did not this once keep his distance. He put his bare hand over hers among the living beds, and let her, and said nothing, for nothing needed saying, and it was the fullest silence of that whole silent winter. He asked her in the glass house in the end, where the whole of it had begun. He did not do it from across the room. He came and stood close, in the warm green, and took both her hands in his, ungloved, unhurried, a man who had made his peace with his own hands at last. "I made certain of your freedom before I let myself ask," he said, "so that you could answer clean. Your name is your own again. The doors are open. You have money owed you, and a father, to be proud of, and no debt to any living soul. You need nothing from me. I would not have you take me out of need, or gratitude, or because there was nowhere else to go. There is somewhere else now. There is the whole world." He paused, and she saw what the asking cost the man who had spent his words so dear so long. "I was walled up alone in myself for 7 years, and did not know it was loneliness until you came and it stopped. Stay because you would, and for no other reason under heaven. Marry me, Linnet. Teach me the use of my own hands. I have 7 years of things saved up to say, and can only bear to say them to you." And Linnet Fenn, who had come to Larkfield with all she owned in one light box and no future at all, stood in the green in the dead of the year and made a choice that was wholly her own now. Freely, out of no fear and no need, wanting nothing she did not already have, and choosing only because she chose. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you and teach you your hands. Though I warn you, I have grown fond of the quiet too, and will want some of it kept." She lifted his bare hand and held it to her cheek as he had held it to hers in the library, the first time she had done it, and not the last. "You gave me back my father's name, but you gave me a better thing first, before it, and before you knew me, when it could still be only what it was. You kept a ruined man's garden alive 7 years for no reason, but that it should go on healing. You gave me back the belief that a kindness could be only a kindness, with nothing owed on the far side of it. I had lost that. It was the worst thing I lost, worse than the name. That is the man I am marrying, not the one who broke his silence in a bright room, though I love him too. The one who kept the garden." They were married at Larkfield in the early summer, quietly among the orchards, and the dowager sat in the front and maintained to the considerable end of her life that she had arranged the entire thing, which, in the way of grandmothers, she substantially had. He learned the use of his hands slowly, and she was patient with the slowness, for she understood what it had cost to lose the habit of them. He never became a warm and easy man. He became a man who could reach for the one hand that mattered when it mattered, which was all she had ever wanted of him, and more than the world had ever thought him able to give. And every winter after, when the frost was on the beds outside, the two of them kept a garden green under glass in the dead of the year, her father's garden, grown from a dying man's cuttings, healing whoever was set before it, and asking, as he had asked, nothing at all on the far side of the giving.